Hello, my fellow readers. Lazy Panda here. There has rarely been a time in my adult life when I wasn't immersed in some form of literature or storytelling, be it movies, episodic series, comics, or especially books. I love reading books, especially fantasy books. As a genre, I find it quite fascinating. It gives authors a blank canvas to create any and all scenarios imaginable, unbounded by the rules of our reality. But today, I wanted to share my thoughts on a specific book. I have recently finished Trash of Count's Family, which is part 1 of the series. I would love to hear your thoughts about the book if you have read it or if you are interested in reading it. I thoroughly enjoyed the part 1 of the series. Despite my work commitments often interrupting my reading, I find myself repeatedly starting over simply because I was having so much fun. And I must say, the later half, which I have been postponing, turns out to be even better than expected. But before delving into my thoughts, let me briefly introduce Trash of Count's Family for anyone unfamiliar with the series. It is a story about a man named Kim Ruk-soo from Korea who finds himself unexpectedly transported into the world of the book series he was reading on his day off, The Birth of a Hero. He became Cale Henitius, the first minor villain, infamously known as Trash of the Count's Family. In the original plot, Kale was supposedly brutally beaten by the main character, Choi Han, who then moves on with his journey along with his companions, who rose to the rank of heroes in the turbulent ages that follows in Eastern and Western continent. Now inhabiting Kale's body, Kim Ruk-soo understandably wants to avoid such a fate, and our story begins. Good old butterfly effect lurks in the background, ready to unleash its chaos with Kale's every decision. What follows is a delightful series of misadventures and unexpected turns. Now, I don't want to delve into spoilers as I firmly believe that this is a story you need to experience firsthand to fully appreciate. And I also want this to be a shorter review rather than going full analysis mode and analyzing all aspects of the story. And trust me, there's a lot to unpack. But that is for another day. Consider this a quick stop for a quick dip into this wonderful series. Also, I'll strive to keep this review as spoiler free as possible, though some details may slip through. For those who are still curious, despite my warning, yes, it is definitely worth reading. This is especially true if you enjoy longer series, as part 1 of the Trash of the Count's Family spans an impressive 760-ish chapters. With that out of the way, let's delve in. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the main story begins when Kim Ruk-soo wakes up as Cale Henitius, the notorious trash young master of Henitius County. Originally, Cale was destined to be beaten by the main character, Choi Han, during a drunken altercation sparked by Cale's rude remarks. However, Kim Ruk-soo, now inhabiting Cale's body, has no desire to suffer this fate. He decides to let the story unfold naturally with one crucial change: avoid getting beaten by the main character. Little does he know, this small altercation sets a butterfly effect into motion and its consequences ripple throughout the narrative. As I mentioned earlier, now before we delve deeper, I wanted to discuss the importance of first minor villain or altercation in any story. This story sets the tone of the world in which the story is taking place. It familiarizes the reader with the norms of the worlds and how people typically behave within it. For a quick example, consider Draco Malfoy from Harry Potter. His views and ideals, which are directly in conflict with those of Harry and his friends, introduces readers how muggles, muggle-borns, and those wizards who are not from prominent pure-blooded families are treated in the wizarding world. Now, back to our story. With the goal of avoiding getting beaten by Choi Han, our story sets into motion. This world also features certain abilities called ancient powers, which are different from mana used by mages and aura used by warriors. These abilities, originally taken by the character, were rarely used by their owners, as these ancient powers aren't powerful enough to be the primary abilities but serve well as a companion abilities. Kale's plan is to gather these abilities without altering the story too much, and due to having their small utilization by the main characters, to become reasonably strong as peace of the western continent is coming to an end, and he needs sufficient strength in order to survive the impending turmoil. Now, let me share my thoughts on this story as a whole. It is truly exceptional. I have thoroughly enjoyed it and looking forward to revisiting some of my favorite bits or even in the entire story. The characters are well developed, from main character to side characters to even some minor villains. There are subtle teasing of the background events. Things that may seem inconsequential at first turns into intriguing plot points. One of the best aspects is the minimal use of infodumps or lore dumps, which we usually call exposition. While these are sometimes necessary to progress the story, in my personal opinion, they shouldn't come at the cost of pacing or feel unnatural in the context of story. The story handles such exposition very well, seamlessly integrating it within the narrative. The main aspect I wanted to discuss of the story overall is pacing. As the saying goes, good stories can take you on for a long drive, but great stories can do the same with a very shorter period. This tale rarely feels like a drag, and even after my multiple rereads. It's a roller coaster of emotion ranging from joy to outright hatred for certain characters. The book's primary appeal for me and likely most other readers is the concept of family, or more specifically, found family. The main character gathers individuals who form a makeshift, seemingly dysfunctional, yet fully functioning family unit. They are willing to fight for each other without any questions. This dynamic persists despite Kale's reluctance to acknowledge how his actions impact those around him and contribute to make this dysfunctional family functional. The story unfolds with a natural progression, revealing details gradually. While it begins with the main character's future knowledge, the element doesn't overstate its welcome. Kim Ruk-soo, now inhabiting Kale's body, has read up to volume 5 of the original story, a significant portion but not the complete story. Consequently, he also needs to gather information in order to plan for the events beyond the scope of volume 5. Also, as happens with novels mostly, not all the things are explained in the beginning. The story needs to unfold properly to understand all those things. That is one of the things I love about Trash of Count's family. Now, a quick thing. Kale is a passive character in the beginning of the story, and that is off-putting for most readers who abandon this series. His goal after coming to this world is to get rich and live life as a slacker. While this is something many readers found relatable, it has also makes Kale borderline passive character, which many readers don't enjoy in the fantasy genre, and I personally agree with most of them. But the issue with this type of character is if he still remains passive throughout. A quick example would be Wendelin Baumeister from 8th Sun manga and light novel. But what saves Trash of Count's family from falling into this is how Kale evolves throughout the story. He goes from borderline passive character to semi-active and to becoming fully active proper main character, especially as the series head towards the third act, which is around the ending of Endable Kingdom arc. There is a clear sense of progression for both main characters and side characters. As mentioned, Kale evolves from passive character to an active one, even putting his goal of slacker life on hold, which he has been working towards, as he prepares for the part 2, The Law of Hunt. A certain tyrant also transforms from a barbarian to a respectable commander-in-chief, or finally into a proper leader, or rather a tyrant who also thinks about his people. A timid boy also grows to become worthy successor of his bloodline, eventually wielding shield as a weapon and actively participating in battles to help his family even a little bit. I could provide numerous examples, but I would rather not spoil the story for you. The minor spoilerish observation and a personal preference that may not be applicable to all readers. I don't dislike romance, but I prefer it not to be the central focus of a story. Now, before fandom communities come at me with their pitchforks, let me clarify. I enjoy romance as an element of the story, but not when the entire plot revolves around it. It's a breath of fresh air to see this story is already so compelling without any romantic subplots. As I have mentioned, I appreciate the romance in a story as much as the next person. But this book is a prime example that you don't need romance to create a fulfilling and good narrative. My friend often used to insist that it is impossible to create a good story, especially in fantasy genre, without romance. Now I have a proper example that not only proves that it can be done, but it also demonstrates that it can be sustained for a very long series. Now, a quick question before going forward. Do you ever watch a show or a movie or read a book and feel frustrated by misunderstandings? Like clear communication could have resolved all those issues. What I've come to realize after watching my fair share of those misunderstandings, that misunderstanding as a narrative device for drama can be infuriating and overused, and often forced. But on the other hand, misunderstanding for comedy, I've never seen anyone complain about. In fact, I don't think it's a trope I will ever get bored of. Kale and others having misunderstanding and misconception is often the comedic backbone of the story. But this brings me to the aspect of the story I have yet to touch upon, the comedy. I read the story mainly on web novel app, which has all the chapters from the main story and 2 out of the 7 side stories, if memory serves correctly. Now, the novel itself is funny, but what made my experience even funnier were the paragraph comments in web novel. It was like reading with a bunch of friends that take it from funny to downright hilarious. Now, on a serious note, the series doesn't shy away from darker themes. I mistook it for purely light-hearted story a couple of times, only to be hit with abuse, slavery, torture, and war, along with their lasting implication on certain characters, and how these events mold them into the character we know and love. This series has a depth and layer that cannot be overlooked by just reading a few chapters. This world is full of life with its own economy, cultural, racial divides, racism, politics, both within the nation and with other nations. Now, even with all this praise, it's only fair that I comment upon something that I think could have been improved upon. There's a seriousness in the story when needed, but more often than not, I don't feel the same sense of crisis or dread I have experienced in other series. In my opinion, the story could have been even greater if if the impacts last on the individuals as a proof of their trials, and should make them triumph even more better. Also, Kales has a certain tendency to be dense when it comes to interpersonal relations, and as expected, it gets older rather quickly. But the only real gripe I have with Trash of Count's Family is that it has yet to be available as a physical book, and you can only read it online or a device. That said, the question is, would I recommend this series to anyone new to fantasy genre or an old avid reader of the fantasy genre? Of course, it is still one of the better series I have read in the last couple of years, and as mentioned, I enjoy it even more. So, if you want to enjoy it even more, try using web novel app with paragraph comments on, and enjoy the delightful series of misadventures and unexpected turns caused by, sometimes intentionally, sometimes completely unintentionally, by Cale Henites in his glorious and noble pursuit of slacker life. Trust me, he's nowhere near to close to achieve his dream, but a man can hope. Needless to say, I'm looking forward to part 2, Law of Hunt. And to any of my fellow readers who have read the part 1, I have faith that it is going to be as good as, if not better than part 1. That's all for today, my fellow readers. Please let me know if you enjoyed this and would like a more detailed review, or if there is any other book you want me to check out. If interested, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks.